very much. Thank you. As you just heard, Brian Perry with Direct Supply, and I've been doing this crazy thing that we call healthcare lobbying for a couple of decades now. So I started on the provider side, have worked for Golden Living, right? Old Beverly company, no longer in existence. But I moved from Golden Living and then went over to HCR ManorCare and ran their government affairs program for almost a decade. And again, HCR ManorCare, a company that no longer exists. So as I like to tell people, if you are the praying type, please say a prayer for Direct Supply just in case it's me. But with that, let's talk about what is just the absolute chaos and madness that is the 535 folks that we elect to the United States Congress and the folks that we elect to the presidency and the folks that maybe were once in some of those seats and some of the policies that they have laid down that takes us to today and what will be, frankly, the next 10 years, the rest of our careers, caring for seniors and their caregivers. I like to start out this way. I'm going to say terms that may be really loaded to you based on your personal politics, like Trump or Biden, unions and trial lawyers and all the things that just frankly moves everybody's blood pressure up or down based on your personal proclivities. Well, I married a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I married one. I refer to her as my in-house counsel, literally. And with that in mind, I like to start out with a little bit of legalese. Let's talk terms and conditions, right? Because we're talking about some pretty tough stuff here. First term, there's two. The first thing we all need to agree to is this. From 9 to 5, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're a lefty or a righty, MAGA, whatever it is. From 9 to 5, we all have one goal in mind here, and it is to be the pro-senior party, right? Being pro-senior, pro-elderly, pro-provider, pro all the things that help our businesses run to care for the elderly in this country. And I think if we keep that in mind, it really takes some of this partisan fever away from us a little bit. Because I'm going to stand here and I'm going to tell you certain things that Donald Trump has done that are just spectacular. And I'm going to tell you certain things that Donald Trump has done that are maybe not so great. And depending on where you are on that side, you're going to say to yourself, oh, this guy's a jerk, or I really like what he's saying, right? But I promise you that if we were standing here in a President Harris administration, I'd be saying the exact same thing, but opposite, right? We in healthcare don't have the luxury of being, say, a Planned Parenthood or an NRA who know on election night that things are going to be all good or all bad based on the results. Unfortunately, in healthcare, we just don't have that luxury. We know that Democrats are going to want to regulate our sectors into the ground. It's just how they're wired. We know that Republicans are going to come after funding in programs like Medicaid. So we always have to go into these battles eyes wide open and understand that our battles are that. We must be pro-senior from 9 to 5. So we've got to agree on that. Bear with me as we talk politics. And the second terms and conditions we must agree to is this. At Direct Supply and in our advocacy organization that we've built, and with myself individually, it's not my business model to make you feel better. And I'm sorry about that. I wish it were. I'd get a lot more smiles. It is my business model to stand here and explain to you guys the real truth, to peel back what are the actionable items from public policy, policymakers, politics that can help you in your executive teams and in your boardrooms make the right decisions to build the infrastructure that we're going to need to care for America's seniors. Sometimes I'm going to tell you about a policy where things didn't go super well for us, or sometimes I'm going to tell you that things are wonderful, but I'm going to do my best to give you the unvarnished truth. And if it doesn't make you feel great, I'm sorry. The joke I always tell is in the words of Harry Truman, if you want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog, right? So if we can agree on those two things, we shall proceed. So let's talk a little bit about Washington, D.C., our state capitals, and everything else that's going on right now in politics and policy. It is chaos, right? It's a 5-letter word. Maybe it should be a 4-letter word, but it is the environment in which we are trying to operate and make business decisions right now. We're going to talk about everything from, massive Medicaid cuts to tariffs to tax reform, but we're looking at everything through the lens of chaos. Think about where you were in January, right? Does anybody believe that was only 9 months ago? It has been an unbelievably fast-paced time in which to do this. I put margins up here because I knew that would probably catch some of the attention, certainly of our capital partners in the room. But really what I'm talking about, I'm sorry guys, is congressional margins. We have so tight of a situation in both the House and the Senate between Republicans and Democrats that you're frankly like one ugly crosswalk accident away from Democrats running the House of Representatives. And it's pretty close in the Senate too. And that means that there is just no margin for error when it comes to trying to pass legislation in this country. And you'll see not a lot of bills will get passed. We're going to talk about one big, beautiful one in a moment, of course. But really looking forward, it's going to be so tight with those congressional margins that it's going to be very, very hard to achieve anything through the legislative process. The news cycle speed adds to the chaos. So let's say you've got a facility in Winnemucca, Nevada, and something unfortunate happens, and it becomes, above the fold on Sunday in your Winnemucca or Nevada news. I should know what their newspaper is. Just wait 15 minutes, and something crazy is going to happen. Some country's going to invade another one, or there's going to be a tweet that throws everything off, or Cracker Barrel happens, right? Like the news cycles are just bananas right now. And so the speed at which that is happening is only adding to the chaos. And frankly, it's causing all of the anger, frustration, and confusion that our voting public, you and me, are dealing with on a daily basis. It's what's causing us to have to start a presentation with terms and conditions. But I think that it's also another reminder that, look, sometimes chaos is a strategy. I mean, one might say, how did we achieve this big, beautiful bill when there were all these other things that were happening? And I would tell you, it's because all those other things were happening. So when you see chaos, think to yourself, at least for 1 minute in the back of your mind, what's really going on here and why is this happening? And it starts to make a little bit of sense. So 2025, where have we been so far? I found this picture to be sort of accidentally very apropos in that this is literally every policymaker in America focusing their attention on one man. And I can't think of another time that that's really happened at this level. Last night I decided I needed to sort of clear my mind a little bit, so I went for a jog, and I ran up to the UT's campus and ran around the LBJ Presidential Library. LBJ's kind of my dude. Robert Caro books, Google it, trust me. The dude knew how to attain and utilize executive power, probably more than any other president at that point in American history. And LBJ can't hold a candle to what President Trump has been able to do in attaining and utilizing that executive power and authority. He can tweet and change elections. It is an unbelievable power. And he was able to utilize that earlier this year as they began debating the big, beautiful bill. Big, beautiful thing. You can call it whatever you want. I call it the bold and the beautiful. I don't know. Let's talk about it. Now, just like everything else in healthcare, I'm going to explain this in these terms. There are some beautiful, big, wonderful things for senior care providers and developers and capital partners in this piece of legislation. And there are some really ugly things too. And that's just a normal part of doing business in Washington, D.C. when you do what we do. This is not new, but this is maybe bigger than usual. And of course, it begins with $1 trillion, trillion with a T, in Medicaid cuts. Now, let me give you some perspective on this. 5 times in American history have we passed a piece of legislation that had $1 trillion included. We spent $1 trillion, be it the infrastructure bill or some of the COVID recovery bills, 5 times. But in this case, this is $1 trillion cut to a program like Medicaid, which cares for poor people and seniors. So this is something very, very new. And I don't think we can sort of underutilize the word draconian when you talk about $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid over the next 10 years. So maybe I'm going to say roughly 750 to 800 billion of the trillion are things like the Obamacare expanded population. It's the able-bodied adult. Some of those folks that a lot of people, even in sort of the partisan policy space, can look at on paper and be like, all right, I can kind of see that. I will also tell you, though, that it's kind of ironic and funny that we're cutting $1 trillion of Medicaid because we need to rein in healthcare spending and pay for this tax reform bill to pass because we're worried about the debt and the deficit. So we cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid to pass a bill that raises the debt and deficit by $3.5 trillion. Now, I'm no mathematician. I went into lobbying because I was told there would be no math, but that's some funny math. The thing that's really pertinent for the providers in the room and for those like REITs that are dealing with operators themselves are these provider tax cuts. I don't want to give you a seminar on provider taxes because I prefer it when you're awake. But it's really important to understand what this is. Provider taxes are a structure that was put in place 4 decades ago that allows states to tax providers to leverage additional dollars from the federal government. Now, do they want to do that because they're crooks and liars? I would argue no. They're not money laundering, as you will see, bandied about in certain policy circles by utilizing provider taxes. States have constitutional amendments that say constitutional requirements, that say they must balance their budgets. And as people get older and Medicaid rolls grow and they've got to pay for teachers, fire protection, police, their budget needs outgrow their ability to raise the appropriate amount of taxes in their states. So we have things like provider taxes that allow this federal match to happen. We're cutting provider taxes by $200 to $300 billion, but that is just a part of this $1 trillion Medicaid cut that we're dealing with. Now, I'm going to tell you, through a very sophisticated lobbying effort, lots of good advocacy, many on behalf of folks in this room, nursing homes were exempted from the provider tax cuts. Woohoo! That sounds like a really, really good thing. And it is a good thing. There's nobody that will tell you that it's not a good thing. But I want to put some perspective around this. And this is where I turn maybe a little bit of a negative Nancy, and I'm sorry for this. A lot of the policy papers that you've seen coming out from, the sector and others will tell you that this is wonderful. It's never been a better time to be a nursing home operator in the country because we have this provider tax exemption. But let's think about this for a minute. We're taking $1 trillion out of the Medicaid pie. And some of that's coming from this source and that source. And Congress has sort of hinted or nudged that, we don't want to cut nursing homes. But I will tell you this, if Congress really felt like they didn't want to see nursing homes have any fewer dollars, they would have included maintenance of effort language. And at least to my knowledge, that language was never even drafted. So what this does instead is takes this responsibility and shoves it not onto Congress, but onto 50 governors and 50 state legislatures. So here's the question for you. If you're an operator, if you're a REIT and you're dealing with your operator partners, whatever state it is that you operate in, ask yourself, is my hospital lobby in this state stronger, more sophisticated, more well-funded, well-heeled, better relationships than my nursing home lobby? My opinion is I would tell you probably in 47 or 48 of those states, that's unfortunately probably true. So now when this Medicaid pie shrinks by $1 trillion, anybody that's getting a slice of that pie today who expects their slice of the pie to remain the same size 10 years down the road, I think it needs to go back to the drawing board and do a little bit more math. This is going to be the lobbying effort at the state level of our generation. The next 10 years is going to be fighting for fewer and fewer dollars. So if you think that the rate pressures are not going to be there for nursing homes, please, please, please pay attention, get loud, and start advocating now. And if you're an assisted living provider, you're saying to yourself well, look, they didn't even mention my AL waivers, so we're good to go, right? Negative Nancy again. I would tell you that I would be particularly worried if you're an AL waiver provider and you're expecting those dollars to flow just like they do today, in that it's an optional program. And when these governors sit down to make these difficult decisions, depending on your state, depending on your governor, your relationships with your legislatures, they're going to make difficult decisions. You're going to have to be in there fighting, yelling, pounding the table to protect those dollars, to make sure that you can care for your assisted living waiver residents the way that you do today. I flag that as something to be aware of because I think that if we all start now, before the crisis is on the shores, we've got a fighting chance. And now that I've scared the pants off of literally everybody, let me give you some good news. Minimum staffing. This is the regulation that the Biden administration put forth that kept us all up at night. And this was the thing we were yelling and screaming and pounding the table on for multiple years. President Biden went before the State of the Union and mentioned nursing homes not 1, but 2 consecutive years. That's never happened before. It was a really, really ugly time and something that we were all trying to figure out, how are we going to pay for, but more importantly, how are we going to find these nurses? Direct Supply is headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In the state of Wisconsin, the minimum staffing rule that was proposed would have required more nurses to be hired than were actually licensed in the state. We literally had to grow them on trees to meet the standards, let alone figure out how to pay for them. So good news in this bill. Republicans led the charge to delay the implementation of the minimum staffing regulation by 10 years. It saved $22 billion in doing so. This was like the greatest news that we've ever seen. But there is better news, I believe, unconfirmed, coming down the pike. HHS has a rule that's currently drafted and working through the process internally that we believe, based on the title of the rule, will overturn the minimum staffing rule for good. It will be donezo. The courts probably were going to kill it. Republicans punted it for 10 years, but I do think that HHS and CMS are about to kill this thing for good. So that's just fantastic news as we try to figure out how to staff not just nursing homes, but when you think about what this would have done to wage rates, economics, and everything else across the sector. So this is fantastic news. Tax reform. You all have better tax people than I am as a tax guy. I can barely work my way through TurboTax. But what I would tell you is, look, there were so many wonderful provisions in this bill to provide some stability and some, I'll call it projectability of what rates are going to be. Lowered corporate tax rates, put in place permanently, so we don't have to worry about these things expiring and going through this fight again. That's wonderful news. R&D tax credits, there are some REIT provisions that were very positive. Items around depreciation. I'm assuming that whoever your CFO is, when he got a call from his tax guy or her tax guy, as this bill was working their way through, they're probably clicking their heels so much they're bruised. So if you see your CFO on crutches, you'll know why. Things are really, really good in this regard. So again, good, bad, ugly, bold, beautiful, otherwise. It's one of those mixed bags for healthcare, and we're keeping a really, really close eye on what this is doing. As we move toward HHS and CMS, I have to pause and say this. I gave this a similar type presentation earlier this year, and people fill out the surveys afterward, and I'm sure Ray will come up and tell you to fill out your survey afterward. And somebody pointed out that they didn't like my slide because they said this photograph of RFK was too sultry. And when I saw the word sultry, I just promised myself I would use this in every presentation for the rest of my life. So here's sultry RFK and CMS Administrator Dr. Oz. What's the story? What are we thinking about from HHS and CMS? Here's Brian Perry's personal opinion. Right now, they're really focused on what I'll call shiny objects. You hear about fluoride in the water supply and red dye in your Fruit Loops. And if you go to Twitter, you'll find RFK and Dr. Oz doing chin-ups and push-ups because it's part of the Make America Healthy Again summer. And I don't know, that's kind of weird, but that's kind of where we are. And I would say, though, in our world, it's kind of refreshing, isn't it? I feel like Javier Becerra, as our previous HHS secretary, would wake up every morning and try to figure out how to put a stick in the eye of senior care providers. It just felt like we were always constantly under attack. So in a way, it's kind of refreshing to sort of have some heat taken off of us for a minute. But at some point, the attention of the bureaucrats and those in the political leadership are going to turn and look at us again. And what's that going to look like? Well, I'll be honest up front, we don't know. In lobbyist parlance, here's a secret. When a lobbyist doesn't know the answer to your question, they will use this phrase: time will tell. And that's when you know the guy just has no idea what he's talking about. Time will tell what HHS and CMS really want to do. But I do believe we are probably moving into an area of, if not deregulation, perhaps some re-regulation in ways that make things a little better for providers as they're trying to deliver efficient care to America's seniors. In the SNF proposed payment rule for this past year, there was an RFI, for instance. Lots of you submitted comments, hell, I submitted a comment about how we can make the regulatory environment a little more rational and a little more reasonable. Patients over paperwork, those types of items that allow us to sort of get back to delivering senior care instead of paperwork for bureaucrats. Very optimistic about that. I think it's going to take a little more time because we've not seen what their plans will be with those comments. And I'll be blunt, maybe nothing happens with them, but I'm very optimistic that we're at least asking the question. During the previous 4 years, the administration would literally ask the questions about what more regulations should we put on these people to deliver better care, because they are the crooks and liars in this story. And so this is a nice, refreshing change of pace. This next one, certificate of need changes, this is probably going to fracture the room a little bit. So if you all need to fight. They have hinted that at least potentially they want to defund states that have certificate of need laws because it's anti-competitive, it doesn't go with free market principles. I would argue that there is absolutely nothing about American healthcare that abides by free market principles. I'll show you the regulations by which we abide. But This is something that's at least being bandied about. And I don't know, that doesn't sound all that legal. That sounds like it's going to land in the courts. But it is an interesting thing that the first thing out of their mouths on the regulation front is certificate of need. So, if you're a nursing facility in the state of Florida and you've got strong certificate of need laws, that probably makes you sweat a little bit. If you're a capital provider or somebody that's looking to, build a new facility from the ground up, this probably makes you really excited. I flag it for you to keep an eye on, depending on what your business model looks like. Chronic health, value-based purchasing, things that we need to keep an eye on because, I've heard Bob Kramer make an unbelievably eloquent argument around the idea that if we're going to focus on chronic health, who better to determine, to help, navigate through chronic health than people who care for the residents that we care for? They've got chronic diseases and they always have. Yes, this is going to be a big focus on things like obesity and some of the Make America Healthy Again, efforts. But when it comes to chronic health, the experts live under our roof. So it's a really interesting idea to think about how we might work arm in arm with HHS and CMS on chronic health issues, particularly as it deals with America's seniors. Value-based care, value-based purchasing, all things that potentially drive down the cost curve in healthcare, which with $1 trillion of Medicaid cuts, it seems kind of obvious that's what they're looking to do. So I think that there are probably some very proactive ways in which we can work with these folks on bringing together solutions that maybe help us all in the end. So what's next? Yes, I keep this countdown. There's 421 days until the midterm elections. We're not even halfway there, folks. So you can decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm sure there are going to be many, many more hyperbolic adjectives as we do this thing because we're like in the age of the hyperbolic adjective. But there are some things that we've really got to keep an eye on. Like, why did this idiot on stage write the word Medicare cuts? Because he's been talking about Medicaid cuts. That must be a typo. Not a typo. We spent so much money in deficit spending in the One Big Beautiful Bill that it triggered automatic sequestration cuts to the Medicare program. A couple $1 million? No, $500 billion of Medicare cuts. Nobody's talking about it. Now, there are reasons why. I would tell you this. What happens is when you do so much deficit spending, it automatically triggers cuts. And we've done this several times over these last few years. I've talked about these $1 trillion bills that we've passed that trigger these cuts. Congress, each and every time, comes to the table to patch those. And I'm going to hope they do that again. Every smart consultant and lobbyist in DC says, don't worry about it. They're not going to cut seniors by that amount. These cuts would be triggered early January is the timeline on this. So, time's running a little short. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan. I know that you cannot celebrate a victory until the third out in the ninth inning because our bullpen is terrible. So I don't do any celebrating. I'm not celebrating the fact that we fixed the Medicare cuts until we fix the Medicare cuts. I flag it because, again, it's something we need to be loud about. We need to be talking to our elected representatives about. And until it's fixed, it's not fixed. So keep an eye on it. Do we take another run at another reconciliation package like the One Big Beautiful Bill, 2.0, 3.0? They've got two more swings at the plate if they want them. It's a funky congressional protocol around reconciliation. Again, won't bore you with that. Catch me afterward if you want a nap. They've got another shot starting October the 1st, and we're already talking about more cuts. Right? So you're going to hear about potential cuts being drafted around inpatient versus outpatient, site-neutral payments on the hospital side. You're going to hear about it in 340B cuts. There could be some more cuts coming our way potentially. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I do think that they have sort of run out of time and run out of votes as we get closer to this 421-day midterm election. The closer we get to it, the more the political lights shine brighter and the more they don't want to do anything that's all that unpopular. We shall see. Again, time will tell. But I do want to keep an eye on that. We could talk about this a little bit later, but the I word. The I word is how I refer to immigration, because you can't say that word out loud in that city without shutting it all down. Immigration, folks. I don't have to explain it to you all. You all know that we don't get out of this historic workforce crisis without at least some form of reform to immigration, be it visas for Filipino nurses or otherwise. We've got a lot of work to do in this space in a very tight margin Congress that is politically polarized. But we're going to have to continue to beat the drum until we figure this out. And then there's the midterms. Then there's the actual election. Well, what happens? I want to remind you, we keep doing this pendulum swing, right? We go hard left and then we go hard right. The Republicans just swept everything in the November elections, and I don't know that the polls saw that coming. So I wouldn't put that much stock in what the polls are telling you now. But I would tell you there's a 50-50 shot that Democrats take back the House. And there's probably just a slightly under 50-50 shot that they take back the Senate too. So what does that mean? If I have any Capitol partners in the room that are snoring in the back, let me see if I can catch your attention with this. Elizabeth Warren is like 3 or 4 Senate seats away from swinging the gavel on the Senate Banking Committee. I don't know. That sounds like an interesting thing. Ron Wyden, Bernie Sanders, Richie Neal, these are all folks that are in line to be swinging gavels, chairing committees that matter something to us coming down the road. Now, we've seen a little bit of that before. Now, Senator Warren hasn't yet swung the gavel on banking. She's next in line. But we've seen during the last few years of the Biden administration what this meant. It meant investigations on assisted living quality, as if somehow immediately assisted living quality was in the toilet. I don't think so. But we investigated it. And we saw right before those investigations, I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence, a lot of like clickbaity headlines that set up those investigations in Congress. And we saw letters to some of your C-suites around quality that you've provided. Now, why would that be? I had breakfast with Ken Sigarnik this morning, and he used this phrase I'd never heard of before, which is, sometimes people can sort of wring every drop of water out of a dime. I kind of feel like a lot of the constituencies that are driving these have squeezed every drop of water out of the dime of skilled nursing facilities. And so guess who's next? That's the private pay market. That's assisted living facilities. That's on down the line, because we've got to find somebody new to regulate, because our friends in the ambulance chasing community need somebody new to sue, and our friends in the unions need some new sector to unionize. So guess who's next? I think it's really, really, really important that we stand up now while they make assisted living the rope in the tug of war between Big Bad Wall Street, and that's some of you guys in their parlance, and Main Street. Because the more they can drive the wedge between Wall Street and Main Street, the more that means Main Street votes for them. And that means assisted living quality. The more they can make us look bad in what we do, regardless of the fact that you're delivering beautiful quality to America's seniors, and the stats show it, and the surveys show it, the more we can frame it otherwise, the more we drive that wedge between private equity, REITs, capital, and that Wall Street versus Main Street thing. So that's potentially what is coming come these midterms. And then I typed the number 2028, I broke into hives, and I decided this. If you want to hear about the 2028 elections, invite me back another time. I don't have it in me, and we're running out of time. So it's coming though, folks. Every decision that gets made 421 days from now, all the way through 2028, is going to be about one thing and one thing only, and that is the presidential election of 2028. And if we go by the Constitution as it is constructed today, Donald Trump cannot run for a third term. So who's that going to be? I don't know. Time will tell. But on the Democratic side, I've got Bernie Sanders, AOC here. Who's to say it's not AOC versus J.D. Vance? Both these folks are younger than me, which freaks me out. But anything could happen, as we have seen before. None of you predicted in 2015, just 10 years ago, that a guy by the name of Donald Trump would be president. So I would tell you that sitting here today, nobody can predict what's going to happen next. We'll talk about it soon. So let me leave you with just a very quick little closing, maybe a slight call to action. I once had a mentor who told me that a political meeting without an ask is just an expensive steak. You think about that for a little while, and that's pretty funny. And this is not a political meeting, but I still, with your indulgence, would like to make one miniature ask of us. Let me start this way. NIC. NIC is not an advocacy organization. It is not set up to be. It is not meant to be. NIC is a data machine, the type of group that can put together data in a way that can drive public policy, that not only do we providers and we capital partners and REITs and everyone else put faith and stock in to help drive our business decisions, but policymakers see NIC the same way. They're that rare breed that can get all of these folks agreeing on one thing, and it's that this data that comes out of this group is spot on and drives senior care in America, and that's beautiful. It's not an advocacy organization. But what I would tell you is, if you're sitting in this room, you're an advocate for America's seniors, for their caregivers, for your businesses. And if you don't act like an advocate, then shame on you and shame on us. Because this is unfortunately the battle that has been brought to us We didn't choose this battle. We didn't choose $1 trillion of Medicaid cuts. We didn't choose unfunded mandates and regulations that get thrown at our sector at all times. But it is the battle that has been thrown upon us because we have decided to do this amazing thing, which is caring for America's seniors and building the infrastructure that will care for this growing demographic in the future. So the more that we get together and advocate with one voice, the better off things are going to be. Let me give you this example. Why are we facing $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts? You know who's not facing $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts? The Defense Department, or I guess as of last weekend, I have to call it the Department of War, if you've been following the news. Electric car manufacturers, the State Department, Foreign Service. None of those groups are facing $1 trillion of cuts. Why us? Why Medicaid providers? And I would tell you it's because we go into every fight and every policy battle already fractured. We look at these issues as skilled nursing facilities versus assisted living facilities, or association versus association, because we're so worried about being able to take the credit when something goes right or something doesn't go wrong, that we don't think about the 85% of issues that every healthcare provider in America agrees on, from hospital to home health and everything in between. We agree on almost everything. We get really loud and we fight in the sandbox over the 10%. So until we start linking arms and taking on these battles as one group, linking arms with people that you may not even like, that's totally fine. One voice in healthcare, I promise you, would have gone into that one big beautiful bill fight and we wouldn't have been talking about $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. You know what $1 trillion is? It's like 4 warships and, I don't know, 10 or 12 fighter jets. We need to start thinking about it in those terms because you all are either building the infrastructure, investing in the infrastructure, or directly caring for human beings. And if we can't figure out how to make that argument with everyone in healthcare, with the families of those for which we care, then we're not built for this government-regulated, government intersection world that we've chosen. And I think that the more that we can go in with one voice, the more we're going to win in the future. It is straight up an idea of we either fight or we lose. And I know which one I'm choosing, and I hope you'll join me. Thank you. And now I get to welcome on the wonderful and talented Ken Zagai.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Great job.
Thanks, man.
That was great, wasn't it? And there's a QR code that if you want to continue to ask questions, I've got a few of them queued up already, and I've got a few I want to get you started. The first thing that comes to mind, though, Brian, after that excellent presentation, was your point about chaos is a strategy, or chaos as a strategy. I think that's the name of your future podcast. What do you think?
I'm in. I've got a face for podcasting, so that's perfect.
Okay, good. Well, we think about the rapid pace of the news cycle. You discussed how things could change in a minute and 15 minutes even. One word that has come up over and over again in the news cycle that we would be remiss if we didn't mention is the word tariffs. And I wanted to ask, from your perspective, and you've got, a unique blend of both being tied directly into a business that provides products, goods, and services to the industry, and also having your finger on the pulse of what's going on inside the Beltway. How should this sector, both the skilled nursing, the private pay, and all, everybody else who's here, part of the senior care and senior housing industry, think about tariffs?
I was hoping we can get through it without the T word. I would make the joke that a year ago, we didn't know if the word tariff had one R and 2 Fs or the other way around, but we all know now. This was really the first thing of chaos that came up. I keep telling people that my sideburns went from dark brown to gray in a 9-month period talking about tariffs because every 15 minutes things were changing. Indonesia is at this percent, China's at this percent, but we're going to pause China. And then while we've got all these container ships in the middle of the ocean, it's a chaotic time to be able to figure out what are things going to cost to make, to assemble, to sell. Where are we assembling these? Are they on this side of the Mexican border or that side of the Mexican border? Here's what I know. If you just straight up look at the idea that we now have across the board tariffs on everything coming into this country in one form or another at a minimum baseline that we didn't have before, costs are going to go up. I can't fathom that every private company that is assembling or making something in this country is going to eat those costs because they just feel that it's their American duty to do so. We haven't seen that happen yet, though, right? We haven't seen the inflation that one might expect for that. I can't speak for any other supplier group. I can, give you just a slight peek under the hood at Direct Supply. We do a little bit of this. Our name is Direct Supply, so you can only imagine. But I mean, we've got a team that is led by a gentleman who has spent time in Asia this year. He's talked about how we can move manufacturing from potentially China to Vietnam to Indonesia. What can we bring onshore? What can we do to shuffle some things around to mitigate some of this? But even the best team in healthcare doesn't understand exactly what it might mean. There is an advocacy component to this. We're talking to the White House and the West Wing and saying, I want you to think about tariffs maybe differently in healthcare than you think about it in the automotive industry, for instance. You jack up the cost of supplies to build, a Chevy Tahoe, and they're just going to increase the price of the Chevy Tahoe, and that's going to be borne by felt by the consumer. You can't do that in healthcare. I mean, if you're running a nursing home and suddenly, your aluminum framed bed goes up by 25%, if you raise the price and you send the bill to somebody, that bill goes to the government, and they're going to laugh at you. But the way that I frame it is this: if you're a nursing home and that happens, inflation is going to hit the government because we do cost reports. And eventually it's going to be 18 to 24 months that the provider is going to have to eat that cost. But eventually that cost goes back to the government and will be reflected in your Medicare rates a couple of years down the road. So when I talk to the administration, I say this, I say, if you think about it, a tariff in healthcare is the government raising the cost ultimately on the government. And that doesn't sound very Doge to me.
Well, I think that the same potential impact will be felt by the private pay sector as well, with perhaps tighter range of options in which to how to manage through it. So I think it's a ubiquitous issue for both the government reimbursement business and the private pay business. Another issue of ubiquity is this issue around workforce. And we've had this conversation here at NIC conferences for many years now in terms of immigration being a possible solution for the challenges that we're experiencing. And you're right about NIC's data expertise, and we've been forecasting the constraints on people to take care of our aging population for a long time, and we're starting to really see and feel and suffer through those impacts as exacerbated by the pandemic. So I guess my question for you, just around the I word, as you phrased it, why is this so hard?
Immigration has always been that sort of third rail thing. I mean, if you think, gosh, it's been 20 years plus now, but you think back to like the George W. Bush second term, we were going to do comprehensive immigration reform, and they had all the votes on the side. Marco Rubio laid down on the train tracks to get something passed, and you just couldn't do it. It's like that political wedge hot button issue that just locks people up. And if you want to play a little bit of partisan politics around it, you would say, look, Democrats want to use it as a racial wedge issue against Republicans. And that's why they don't want to fix it. And Republicans sort of frame it in our world like immigration reform means drug kingpins jumping Trump's wall to deliver meds in a nursing home. And that's why they don't do anything about it. And this is going to shock everybody, but the truth is actually somewhere in between those two crazy positions. There is no way for us to get out of this historic workforce crisis without immigration reform in some fashion. It's not the silver bullet, but it is required to fix some of these issues in a low-wage environment. Let's talk about deportations that we're doing right now. And maybe that doesn't hit us directly, right? Because we do background checks, we do all those things. But if you're in a small town in the middle of, say, Iowa, and suddenly farms are being raided, hotels, restaurants are being raided. Those are jobs that are paid about the same wage rate as a CNA. And so those jobs are going to be open, and it's going to be harder to hold on to these already crucial positions that we have. I get optimistic in that when you talk to, I'm going to say Republicans, for instance. I've heard Speaker Johnson, who's from Louisiana, talk about understanding immigration reform through the lens of crawfish farmers. And that tells me he gets it, right? It's a local issue. Senator Thune can talk about it through the lens of farmers in South Dakota, and that means he gets it. I was in a meeting once, a closed-door meeting, where we'll call them a powerful Republican senator said their desire on immigration reform is to build a big, beautiful wall that has a big, beautiful gate. And I really like that imagery. I like that mindset. but we've yet to see it put down on paper.
Yeah.
And somebody is going to have to suck this up from a standpoint of when I get behind immigration reform, I might get primaried from the left, I might get primaried from the right. But somebody's going to have to take that courage to push this through, because there's just no way that this sticks on this path forever.
Well, and the comments you made before about minimum staffing and what the impacts could have potentially been without having some pressure relief valve, it's almost impossible to see that math out, even though you said you're not a math guy.
Not a math guy.
Brian, anything new or hotly topical that's been coming across the airwaves, even as you're here at this conference and getting ready to prepare for today's speech? Anything that maybe people aren't even aware of today?
Every time I do one of these and you put slides down, the slides are out of date the second you do them. So I turned these slides in, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks ago. And I was just like, at any point, something's going to happen. And then nothing happened. And I was like, gosh, I was almost hoping for something topical. And I kid you not, I got a text from somebody as I was walking in that door today. Apparently, about an hour ago, maybe an hour and a half now, Dr. Oz tweeted, and this is important and topical, that HHS and CMS will be proposing a new $75 million workforce fund that will be dedicated just to nursing homes going forward. So that's great news. That's something, right? Had minimum staffing been in place, we had projections that showed us it was going to be $75 billion. Luckily, minimum staffing seems to be going away, and now $75 million to actually start the process that is a very long process of training nurses. Now, I haven't seen anything more than the tweet, but we do policy by tweet these days. So I was appreciative to Dr. Oz for giving me something new and topical to talk about. But
absolutely.
Hot off the press.
And it aligns with your topic that there has to be first recognition of the issue before change or reform could occur.
That's right.
So by putting out a $75 million fund, perhaps, potentially, or at least signaling awareness of the issue, maybe that becomes the hinge to that gate that you were talking about on the big wall.
That's it. I'll take it.
Let me ask you this. Nick is constantly trying to find ways in which to expand our tent. We have 5 strategic pillars that have been priorities of Nick's strategic plan. That they include age tech and capital for operations, partnering for health, active adult, and the idea is to come together and think of ways in which we can exchange information, thoughts, and expertise and best practices to help rise all boats in this industry. Is there anything, and one of the other priorities that we have is to expand the capital base that's coming to the industry. Is there anything that when you look at the one big beautiful bill that might take the attention of potentially new investors to sit up and say, let me take a closer look at either senior housing, senior care, or the whole long-term care post-acute industry?
Sure. You could probably put on an entire conference of the tax provisions and the, frankly, very good things in the tax provisions that were put forth. I think about that lowered corporate permanent tax rate that hopefully provides some stability and predictability that will allow sort of some of maybe this locked up capital to be released a little bit. I'm optimistic that we're started seeing a little bit of green shoots in that regard. But I think about things like R&D tax credit is something that I don't think a lot of people in our space had really done a lot of work on while the bill was being debated. And then as it was being digested, we realized there's some really, really good provisions that are going to allow us to go back and capture some of those R&D things that we did maybe in the years 22, 23, 24 that weren't accounted for. So that's like a nice one-time benefit. One thing we didn't talk about, one of the ways they got the bill passed with certain rural state senators who were a little worried about their rural hospitals closing was to put forth a fund at the very end, which will denote $50 billion over 5 years. There will be grants to states that will be called the Rural Health Transformation Fund. And it was deemed hospitals, rural hospital fund, this and that and the other, in sort of general parlance. It was the way it was reported. But when you read this statute, you get the impression that this is going to be facilities like ours that will, in rural areas, really qualify for some of these funds. Nursing homes, assisted living facilities potentially. And I think that the more, I flag it this way, let me say this. If you have a relationship with your governor in your state, leave here and after you eat lunch, pick up the phone and call their office and say, I want to make sure that we are engaged in this conversation when you figure out what's in this Rural Health Transformation Fund. What we know is that HHS is developing the criteria now, and they expect sometime this month to tell the states what that looks like. It's things like utilizing technology to protect access to care in these rural areas. So think about things like remote patient monitoring, anything that will allow you to more efficiently transition patients from a hospital to a post-acute setting, utilizing technology, all of those types of platforms, we think will qualify. And so it's $50 billion over 10 years. Each state, we believe, will get the same amount. So I'm sorry, California, you get the same as Connecticut. Congratulations, Connecticut. Think about how you can work with your governor's offices to make sure that you are carved into those funds. It doesn't fix $1 trillion of Medicaid cuts by any way, shape, or form, but man, we'll take every $75 million workforce fund. We'll take every possible, ability to add more dollars to our space that is already undercapitalized by the government. I'm very optimistic.
And it's money to be taken, and if you're saying it's not totally, formally earmarked for a hospital, then we ought to be having that conversation so people see us as being an important part of the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
Taking care of our seniors, whether in major metro markets or rural areas.
Absolutely.
Let me turn to some of the audience questions for you, Brian. Are there any states that you believe would be in a better position than others with respect to potential Medicaid cuts? As it specifically relates to the impact on our industry, as you were describing before.
Sure. I will say this. Don't read through the legislation. Read a really good summary of the legislation, but there are differences between the expansion states and the non-expansion states to how they were treated around the provider tax cut provisions. Unsurprisingly, with Republicans writing the bill and only Republicans voting for the bill, they favor the states that decided not to expand under Obamacare. So look at those states for one. I would also say that you have to think about governors, right? So I hate to keep coming back to this political thing, but God, I don't know, half our governors probably running for president on stage in 2028. So you're going to have those that will make a lot of political statements. I mean, take a guy like Gavin Newsom, for instance. I mean, he's the kind of guy with like so much confidence he struts when he's sitting down. You know what I mean? But the dude's been running for president since he was in the womb. And he's going to look at policies that have been drafted by Donald Trump, perhaps a little differently than, Mike Braun in Indiana, for instance. A guy like Mike Braun, was around for a lot of the formation of some of these policies as they were kicked around before he became governor of Indiana. So you're going to have Trump-aligned governors, you're going to have others. And look, let's be honest, this Rural Health Transformation Fund gets an up or down approval process from HHS and CMS by 12/31 of this year. I don't know, maybe they look at this through a political lens as well. I'd like to think they don't. But you could be favoring your red states there as well.
Fair
so I would look at your Medicaid margins in states. I said think about your states in which you have a hospital lobby versus a nursing home lobby. There are some states with a nursing home lobby who are out of this world. I mean, I've got a good friend that runs the Alabama Association for Nursing Homes, and he's like the smartest guy in the sector. You're going to have that. So you've got to start looking at all of those various angles because these issues are going to be debated at the state level with governors. So it is a call to action to say, figure out who those states are that are currently sophisticated. And if you've got your eyes on a state that's not that sophisticated, put it on yourself to get in there and be really, really loud around some of these tables because we've got the ability to fix this.
You've made it clear that, these types of pressures roll downhill. So, in your earlier comments, you made the point that an exemption for the SNF on the bed tax doesn't necessarily mean that we're in total safe, or the skilled nursing industry is in total safe harbor. And then, you talked about how acute health squeeze will squeeze the whole system. We're seeing some states now announce Medicaid waiver cuts for assisted living. Are you suggesting that you think it's directly correlated to the pressure that's coming down from the One Big Beautiful Bill?
I mean, that thing passed, 2 months and 2 or 3 days ago. And right out of the gate, we saw North Carolina come out with a $300 and some million Medicaid cut proposal, which we think that they're negotiating right now with the legislature to avoid. I've got a voicemail right now from a provider in the state of Idaho who is meeting with their governor today because the state of Idaho proposed a 4% cut. That's a pretty ruby red pro-Trump state like Idaho. I have to fathom that it's not a coincidence that a lot of these state policymakers are looking at the cuts to come. And let's remember, these provider tax cuts that we've been talking about don't start for another year or two. So it's not like the cut is on the shore today, but there is planning that goes into these things. I absolutely believe that they are already looking at how can we clamp this down, because otherwise we're going to approach this cliff as these funding mechanisms go away. And that's really going to cause some very difficult choices. I mean, you have, I'm going to say at least four people in the House and the Senate who voted for those cuts, who envision themselves as the next governor of their state. And I think that's a really interesting thing to imagine, that they're going to have to go home and face those cuts and determine who goes where, because they got nobody to blame. It's really easy. If I'm the governor of Illinois, I can say, well, that's somebody else's problem. They gave it to me, I'm sorry, and I can wear the halo. But there's going to be a lot of folks that can't wear the halo around those cuts.
Brian, a lot of what you talk about emanates from concepts of time, which is always short, and money, which seemingly is always short. Thoughts or comments on a possible government shutdown?
Oh, yes, we have to fund the government, right? Look, they're working on it now. They're back in town now after the August recess, and funding for the government runs out at the end of this month, because we can never, of course, do something like fund the government before like the immediate deadline. It's not that I'm the guy that fills out his taxes on April 15th, but I'm the guy that fills out his taxes on April 15th. And there's differing points of view. You'll see a lot. There seems to be some movement from the Freedom Caucus, the more fiscally conservative folks, who seem to be saying out loud right now that maybe we can do a short-term patch and get us up to, say, right before Thanksgiving. They also like to make holidays the deadlines, because holidays motivate people to just say, yeah, I'll vote for the thing because I want to go home and spend Christmas with my family. So there could be two bites at this apple, that they have to do a short-term funding package into November and then figure out, are we going to do this thing again? But could the government shut down? Absolutely. I don't know that either side has really articulated what they want out of a shutdown. Sometimes there are these philosophical things that say, I will not cut further as the president. You saw this during the Clinton-Gingrich shutdown in '94. Nobody's really articulated, like, what's the whole point in shutting this thing down, other than just like upsetting somebody that had a vacation to Yosemite planned. And so they'll fund the government at some point, but it's going to be really messy at the end of this month. It'll be messy again probably right before Thanksgiving, and then we get into the year-end package stuff, and that's where things get messy again.
It's guaranteed employment for you, Brian. I would say...
guaranteed employment for my therapist.
There's been some great questions that have come through. I want to make sure that I get to this one, because one of the mandates that you've put out there is for the operators and the capital providers and the partners in this room to think like advocates and to advocate for the seniors industry. And one of the questions that comes up is, how do you see local advocacy impacting federal policy?
Well, I'll take, you can say local many ways. Do I want you to go advocate in front of your city council? I don't know, maybe. Really, I think about local advocacy sort of like inside the walls of our businesses, with our employee base and their families, with our residents and their families, whether it's a nursing home, assisted living, independent living, or otherwise. When I think about, like, for instance, nursing homes, I always say to myself I think there are 2.7 people who have a vested interest in that resident's care and outcome. And each of those people in that facility that are working there oftentimes have a spouse or a voting age child. If we could just take everyone that has a vested interest in the outcome of your business and your households and your seniors, we would be a force that could not be stopped. And it's unfortunate that we have yet to figure that out, but we're working on it, by God, and we're going to figure this out. If you can just motivate the people inside the walls of your business to say, you know what, the outcome of this bill, this policy, this regulation directly impacts our ability to continue to pay you. That's pretty blunt, right? But I've seen doors shutter. I've had doors shutter around me. And it happens. If we can motivate everyone by whatever motivates them, sometimes it's a paycheck, but God, nobody goes into this sector to put a couple Lamborghinis in their driveway. People go into this sector because their heart is in the right place. They want to care for America's seniors. And if you can capture that passion and that heart, and frankly, tell our stories with all of the things that happen inside the walls of senior living and senior care facilities across America, there's just no way we can be stopped at the polls.
Combine that with the secular tailwinds of demographic growth, and I think it's a story that's too big to be ignored also.
Shame on us if we can't figure it out.
Can you believe this is Brian Perry's first NIC conference? I mean, I'm just blown away. It sounds like he's been here forever, and I'm sure he's going to be here for many years to come. Join me in thanking Brian for doing an excellent job in educating us and informing us. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve, man.